Welcome back. Our guest now is, I think, going to be pretty inspiring and interesting to talk to. We have Dr. Samuel Gregg with us today. He's the Director of Research at the Acton Institute, and he's authored quite a few books, Morality, Law, and Public Policy, Economic Thinking for the Theological Minded. I haven't read that, but I think, Dr. Gregg, I think I need to pick that one up and read it. I'd like to read that one. And today we want to talk to him about why are socially conservative Catholics and Libertarian Tea Party adherents united in opposition and intervention in Syria? And even though Syria is not a hot topic in the news, it's still brewing out there. And this is very, very interesting. So, Dr. Gregg, nice to have you, my friend.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. And I think it's a very important subject that you're just covering right now. Even though it's off the policy agenda, I think it's still going on.
It certainly is. And we hear the president waving his saber still in the air over this issue. So I'm not sure where the administration is going. But why is this important to Catholics and Tea Partiers?
Well, I think the basic reason is in some respects similar. The basic reason is that both groups are very concerned about the expansion of government right now. In my book, Tea Party Catholic, I spent a lot of time explaining why this is the case, why conservative Catholics are very worried about this. But with regard to Syria in particular, what I think you find is that conservative Catholics are looking at Syria and saying there are 2.5 million Christians there. Mm-hmm. And the people who are being hurt the most in the middle of this terrible civil war are, of course, Christians. And most of them are being attacked, persecuted. In some cases, they've even been killed by the very same people who U.S. intervention would have been helping. So I think that's part of the underlying Catholic concern with this issue would be that Christians are going to get hurt if the United States intervenes in this particular situation. But I think that with the Tea Party group and with conservative Catholics, as I show in my book, Tea Party Catholic, there's a lot of common concerns they have about the role of government in the economy in particular right now. And in Tea Party Catholic, I try to explain how that occurs, why it is the case, and what can be done to make sure that the movement for liberty throughout the United States is something that American Catholics can participate in and contribute to.
All right, let me stick with Syria just for a moment, then we'll jump over to the economy. It appears that no matter what action we take in Syria, if the United States was to get involved at any level, we are fueling a enemy of the United States and an enemy of the church.
Correct.
And so I can't help but think that any involvement there is just going to exercise that to a whole new level. So the other thing is the very fact that the Islamic groups there in Syria would like to see the Christians wiped off the face of the earth. Why isn't that more world-renowned in its attention than what it actually is?
Because it's not fashionable to say that Christians are being persecuted in the world right now. Last year, estimates ranged between 100,000 and 150,000 in terms of the number of Christians who were killed because of their Christian faith. Now, I can think of a lot of other groups that if that same number was being talked about, the European Union would have invaded the Middle East by now. But when it comes to Christians, it seems as if this is something that people are willing to acknowledge on the margins, but they're not willing really to confront what it looks like. So it's not just in Syria, it's in Pakistan, it's in Africa. We see, for example, in Nigeria, about every second week, someone drives a truck full of bombs into a Catholic church. And this is simply not being discussed in the West. And I think it's because persecuted Christians are not a fashionable minority right now.
Well, the world, in a hypocritical way, is tolerating intolerance.
Of course, and in the West we talk about tolerance all the time, but it appears that when it comes to Christians, well, somehow that's a little different. And that's something I think that Christians, whatever their confession, should be bringing up again and again and again to policymakers, because it's something that they know about. We all know about this, but policymakers and legislators, both in America and in Europe, very reluctant to talk about it.
All right, let's skip over to the economy. And by the way, his book is, I think, cleverly entitled The Tea Party Catholic. You may want to check it out at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and get a copy of it. Okay, Dr. Gregg, you see the battle going on in Washington, even as we speak, over the budget, the economy. health care, the whole 9 yards. What is the Tea Party Catholics' position on the tug of war?
Well, I think this tug of war has been going on not just over the past week. In fact, it's a struggle that's been going on but has really intensified, I think, over the past 10 years or so. We've seen over the past 10 years the expansion of government into the economy in ways that clearly do not fit very well with the American experiment. And in my book, Tea Party Catholic, what I try to show is that this concern for limited government, a concern for making sure that entrepreneurship flourishes and for making sure that economies remain as free as possible, is something that Catholicism has always affirmed right from the very beginning. I think in America, we often fall into the trap of thinking, well, all Catholics are in some way glued on to the Democratic Party, that they all join trade unions, and that they all are in favor of Roosevelt-like New Deal policies or even Lyndon Johnson's not-so-great society programs. But in Tea Party Catholic, my book, I try to show that that dynamic has shifted enormously over the past 20, 30 years. And now among fiscal conservatives in the United States, you'll find plenty of practicing Roman Catholics. And I try to explain in this book, which I've written in I hope, a way which is accessible, that this should not be surprising, that in fact there are many good reasons for Catholics to be fiscally conservative, but that there are also things that Catholics can bring to the fiscal conservative movement throughout the United States, such as an attention to the fact that things like entrepreneurship, they're not just economically beneficial, they're also something that allows us to flourish as we ought to flourish. They enable us to become better human beings. I also try and show in the book that when Catholics say that they're concerned for the poor, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily in favor of big government. Concern for the poor does not translate, I think, necessarily into big government programs. And I think there's a lot about the modern welfare state that Catholics should be very, very critical of. And Catholics also should, by the way, be very concerned about the levels of debt in the United States, which, of course, is very central to the current budget debates in Washington, D.C. right now.
Well, first of all, the Catholic Church has been very outspoken on the whole issue of life, especially as it relates to abortion. You got HHS breathing down your collar, and because of your stance, I think you turned a lot of heads, and I commend you for that. And those kind of persecutions continuing to go on. I quite frankly think if you didn't take a more strong position, your church, on these issues, we would have lost them a long time ago.
Well, I think also that, let's call them lifestyle liberals. They know that if you can roll the Catholic Church, every other institution is easy after that.
Right.
So they know that. That's one reason why they're focusing such attention on these things. But the other thing, of course, is that what we're realizing, and which I think a lot of Catholic bishops and priests and laity are starting to realize, is that when you start to suffocate economic freedom, which you see in the case of Obamacare, that has very negative implications for religious liberty. So in my book, Tea Party Catholic, I spend a whole chapter explaining that once you start to try and suffocate economic liberty, this has overflow effects into other areas of freedom, not just political freedom, but religious freedom as well. Because the whole vision in forming the modern welfare state is that vision of human beings that's formed by lifestyle liberals, that we're somehow all just mere pleasure creatures, that all we are driven by are our desires, and that the role of the state is somehow to satisfy whatever our desires happen to be. So I think that this is something that in more recent years, particularly over the past 2 years, that a lot of Catholics have started to understand. And in Tea Party Catholic, I try to explain the origins of this, but also some of the things that Catholics may need to do if they want to push back and make sure that our First Amendment rights are protected and remained as robust as the American founders wanted them to be.
Beautifully said. Well, listen, I commend you on your work. I look forward to getting into the book. We'll have you back. It's called The Tea Party Catholic. Check it out. It's available at Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.
Amazon is the best place to go. Tea Party Catholic at Amazon.com.
All right. Thanks, my friend. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, and that's Dr. Gregg, Samuel Gregg, and again, you may want to check that out, Tea Party Catholics, and check it out at Barnes & Noble or online at Amazon.com.